Marie. So we have been talking about data over the last few days, and I wanted to continue on with this conversation today and really dive into what are the numbers that matter most in your trades business. And these numbers definitely differentiate in terms of what your role is at the company. But I want to get back to the basics here because there have been a number of customers that I've worked with before on the CMO perspective and well, on the CMO level. So I'm working with other executives, other heads of companies, owners, operators. And some of the things that they've been looking at have not been the real bottom line numbers, the numbers that really move the needle. And so I think this is just a really good opportunity for all of us to come back to the basics of what are vanity metrics, still important. Vanity doesn't mean that they lose their meaning, but they do not hold as much weight as some of these bottom line numbers. So the real story, I guess, I want to offer with you is a trap that I've seen many businesses fall into. When I first started working as fractional CMO for one particular business, they had some data, not a lot. And so the very first thing that we did in working together, when we come on from the Foundation First perspective, the very first thing we do is we do an audit. What is the data you have access to? Who are you working with? What kind of customer information do you have? What kind of data is being offered to you in terms of who you're working with? And we do a deep dive on the website. What are the analytics? What are the social media analytics? How are you being found? How are people being attracted to you? Then we also do an analytics dive into perception. So we actually send out a survey from the customer perspective and perception of your business, and then also the internal employees. Because at the end of the day, your employees are the ones that your customers are working with. And so if your customers have a very different, or your internal team has a perspective of your business, or honestly, even an engagement with your brand, they will thus portray that as they're working with folks. And so it's important for us to really get a good understanding of how are you being perceived externally and internally, because if there's a match, that means that your team is portraying you as such, it's being received accordingly, or it's also just digital. If your past customers are perceiving you in one way, and then the leads, we're doing kind of a general understanding going out into the market and doing an analysis on how is this company being perceived. They've never worked with you, but what is the general perception? What's the customer perception? And then finally your internal team's perception. And then it's bridging the gap and or doing a corrective measure to ensure that it really is on brand and that there's continuity and consistency across every level of analysis, internally and externally, both as it pertains to people who've never worked with you and people who have, that the experience is lining up in terms of what you're saying you'll do and who you're saying that you are. And we want to make sure that the experience matches that. So the very first step that we take is actually diving into who are you? What does the data have to say? And then how can we learn from that data? But if we don't have those numbers to track, then we go ahead and implement the systems in order to track that. So specifically as it pertains to what are the numbers that you should be looking at. So when we came on board with this one particular company, the only vendor that was giving them the numbers that I wanted to see from a CMO perspective was an affiliate partnership. But what we saw was that while the affiliate partner was giving us numbers that were very top of the funnel, so it was like cost per lead, per region, per service, that was awesome. But what we weren't seeing on the back end, what they weren't providing us because they didn't have access, we were not able to see the fulfillment of that cost per lead, where they actually was that lead turning into an appointment, was that lead turning into a sale. And so we were only looking at a very, very small amount of those, I guess you could say, data points. And then this is where we need to have the vendor give us their information. We need our customer call center and to give us the information about appointment conversions. And then we also need to have kind of back end sales numbers. And then we can trace, okay, what is the actual conversion percentage out of all the leads coming in through affiliates? How many of them are, we talk about leaking buckets, how many of them are falling through the crack of customer care center where the call center actually cannot get in touch with them? The lead comes in, they're filling out the form through the affiliate partner. We cannot get a hold of them. So that's leaky bucket number one. And then bucket number two, which is the appointment. Okay, We only have 30% of all of those leads that we do get a hold of turning into appointments. Okay. And then what about the next bucket, which is moving on to the proposal and the signed contract? So how many of those appointments are actually getting canceled? That's a leaky bucket in terms of the appointment bucket. And then how many of them are actually, not moving on to be sold to and become a real customer? So this is the analysis that we're looking at, and not just with affiliates. We need to be looking at this for every single area that we're spending money on. And the reason why we're saying, what are the numbers that we should be looking at? We need to be looking at the end of the journey. What percentage of our leads are turning into sold customers? And then here's the other thing: what percentage of those are turning into sold customers, and which services are we actually selling? Because one of the things that we saw was that affiliate leads, they were only willing to buy our cheapest service. They were not turning into the high ticket, high dollar service offerings that we were selling. So most of us, as trades businesses, we have different tiers of services. We've got kind of the ones that are more expensive, and then the lower tier. If we only have specific types of customers coming through a specific marketing channel, for example, affiliate, those affiliate leads are only willing to spend maybe under two, they're only willing to spend maybe under $2,000. Well, then they're going to be buying that service, or maybe $1,000. They're going to be buying that cheaper service. So then when we're looking, and we're looking at that customer in general, let's call him Bob. Bob comes through the affiliate channel. Bob goes in and actually has an appointment. And then Bob goes through and actually becomes a sold customer. But Bob is one of 10 people that came through the initial affiliate kind of stream. He's the only one that converts. But for all 10 leads, it was $100 cost per lead. That looks great, as opposed to Google, that's $150. And so then when you're looking at this and it's like, okay, I've got all these leads that are coming in, it's $100 cost per lead. Affiliates is a great, great platform for us to be spending money on. But then as you follow the journey, it's like people are weeding out. So then you got all these leads coming in, 10 leads. You can only get in touch with 5 of them. Well, now we only have a 50% conversion rate. So we only have 5 appointments. Out of those appointments, only 3 take place. And then now we actually only have 1 sold customer out of all 10 that initially filled out the form. So now Bob, he's not a $100 lead. He's a $1,000 customer, but he's only buying a $2,000 service. That means 50% of our entire profit margin is going to just pay for getting Bob. That doesn't include cost of goods. That doesn't include any overhead of the company, much less any net profit margins. So when we got involved with this company, that was the problem that we saw, was that they weren't following the entire customer journey. They were only looking at the cost per lead from that channel. And so as we started diving in, we realized, we can only actually advertise with affiliates if they're buying our $8,000 product, maybe 10,000. Spending 10% on your marketing, that's a little bit high, but it's also not too bad, especially if you're in a newer territory. Affiliate marketing can actually be a really good place for you to spend your time and spend your dollars, because you don't have much brand reputation or I guess you could say brand trust built. So affiliate marketing could be good. You're also going to see the consequence of that on your profit margins. But what the biggest problem is, and this is really what I want to identify here, is that one of the key questions that we need to be asking as it pertains to our marketing spend, that every single trades owner needs to be asking of their CMO and their entire team, in terms of vendors and partners on the marketing side, is: what is the cost per customer? It's not about cost per lead. It is about your cost per customer. Because at the end of the day, yes, cost per lead, it's important, but it's a vanity metric. If you're not following that lead all the way through the conversion cycle and the customer lifetime cycle, you're not really going to know, is this service a viable service to advertise on this channel? You're also not going to know, is this even a viable channel to begin with? And you also can be looking at, okay, this channel per market. So it's channel per service, channel per market. And then in addition, I'm going to go here because we're talking about data, taking a look at the actual sales guys per channel. there might be some guys that when they know, okay, this is an affiliate lead versus a Google lead. And for those of you who don't know, affiliate leads come in, they're filling out a generic form on, getanewwindow.com. They're filling that out. And then getanewwindow.com is selling the leads to whoever's going to have the highest bid. And then they sell it to you and me. And then we have to go out and sell the lead. But that lead is not filling out our website. It's coming in completely cold. So it has no brand recognition, no brand identity. So what that means is that the sales estimator needs to take a very different approach when they're filling out or when they're going in to try to convert that into a full job. But also the call center needs to take a very different approach from the way they call a lead who fills out a form on our website versus filling out a form for an affiliate website. They have no idea who we are, and we need to treat them accordingly and also introduce ourselves and help them get to know us and why are we operating as a company, what are our values, what's our mission, who are we. Thus it allows us to have an emotional connection with that lead who has no idea who we are. So the data points that we need to be looking at is the end of the customer journey to understand if we've got a viable marketing channel, especially considering, okay, is it viable for every single service or only particular ones? Is it viable in certain territories or all territories or vice versa? And then, okay, are we actually training our call center to sell them in terms of scheduling the appointment differently than we are customers coming in who already know who we are? And then are we training our sales guys to talk to them different? Because again, they don't have that emotional buy-in. They don't know us. And so the way that we nurture these customers coming in or these leads coming in from affiliate channels needs to be very, very different. But all of that is going to show up in the end of the customer life cycle. So that when we're looking at affiliate channels versus Google channels, those initial high level numbers, cost per lead, are going to end up being very different when we start looking at cost per customer. The second number that I want to talk to you about that needs to be analyzed by owners and operators is what is our net versus just our gross. Y'all, this is so another story with a company as I got involved. They were having their numbers consistently go up every year over year. Leads were coming up and growth was a steady incline for 6 years, year over year, growth in terms of leads. Same thing with gross, year over year, incline. It looked amazing. But y'all, when I looked at net, we were declining just as fast as we were growing. So it was like all these kind of, and this is where it's like, man, gross profit is a vanity metric only when you consider the fact that it does not actually show true profitability. Y'all, the numbers that private equity is looking at, they're looking at net, and they're also looking at, okay, well, let's say you're investing that number back into your business. Is it actually going into the growth of the business or is it all going into just cost per goods? Are you actually a profitable business? And so, yes, leads, having those spikes are good. We want more leads. And yes, profit, gross profit, we want more of that. But y'all, if you're not actually taking any money home at the end of the day, are you really that successful as a business? And another thing, too, if your cost per lead is going up year over year as your lead number is going up, is that an efficient spend? What we ended up having in that first year of working with this particular company, we saw a 30% decline in leads because we started to stop paying for these channels that, yes, we had, it was like inflated lead numbers. We'd get a lot of leads from them, but they were terrible quality. They wouldn't convert. And they ended up having a really, really expensive cost per sale. So we shut that off. We still grew as a company to almost 10% from the previous year in terms of gross. And that was the first year that we saw a positive net increase. First time in 6 years where we saw a positive net increase. Y'all, these are the numbers that we need to be looking at: cost per sale and net versus gross. Do not take just these vanity metrics as a sign of success. Be looking at the bottom lines. These are two of the most important numbers you as a company owner, operator can be looking at. And I highly encourage you to ask your marketing vendors, partners, and internal team if they're looking at these numbers as well. So with that, thank you all so much for joining me today. I will see you tomorrow for our daily conversations in the trade. Talk to you soon.